The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Beatrice Montgomery's blistering feet as she stumbled over the cracked earth, her once fine traveling dress torn and filthy, her throat so parched she could barely swallow. 3 days lost in the unforgiving desert, and she was beginning to see things wavering mirages that disappeared when she reached for them. Phantom sounds that whispered promises of salvation, only to fade into the relentless silence of the desert. It was 1874, and Beatrice had made the grave mistake of disembarking from the stagecoach when it stopped for a wheel repair. "Just stretching my legs," she'd told the driver. But curiosity had drawn her farther from the road than she'd intended. And when she heard the crack of gunfire and the sudden thunder of hooves, she'd run blindly into the scrubland. The bandits who'd attacked the stagecoach had stolen her shoes right off her feet while she hid, trembling, behind a large boulder. By the time she'd gathered her courage to return to the road, the stagecoach was gone, along with any trace of which direction she should travel. Now, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon for the third time since her misadventure began, Beatrice's pace had slowed to a painful shuffle. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her once auburn hair now a tangled, dust-coated mess around her sunburned face. The desert had been merciless, stealing not only her strength but her hope as well. She stumbled over a hidden rock and fell hard, her hands barely breaking her fall against the hot ground. For a moment she simply lay there, too exhausted to rise, the hot tears she couldn't afford to shed burning behind her eyelids. "This is it," she whispered to the uncaring desert. "This is where Beatrice Montgomery's grand adventure west ends. Not in San Francisco starting a new life, but face down in the dirt." A shadow fell across her prone form, and for a moment, Beatrice thought it was just another trick of her heat-addled mind. But then she heard it, the soft nickering of a horse and the creak of leather. "Madam? You alive down there?" The voice was deep, slightly rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Beatrice forced her head up, squinting against the glare. Silhouetted against the blazing sky was the unmistakable shape of a man on horseback. In his hand was a canteen, water sloshing audibly within its confines. "Help," she managed to croak, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he approached, his features became clearer. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denims, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. But to Beatrice, he might as well have been an angel. "Name's Thomas Blackwood," he said, crouching beside her and gently helping her to sit up. "Looks like you've had yourself quite a time out here." He uncorked his canteen and held it to her lips. "Small sips now," he cautioned as she grabbed for it desperately. "Too much too fast will make you sick." The water was warm but felt like heaven as it trickled down her parched throat. She wanted to gulp it all, but the steady hand holding the canteen controlled her intake. "Beatrice," she managed after a moment. "Beatrice Montgomery." His eyes took in her battered feet, and his expression darkened. "What happened to your shoes, Miss Montgomery?" "Stolen," she whispered. "Bandits. The stagecoach." Thomas nodded grimly. "Heard about that. 3 days back, wasn't it? They found the coach about 10 miles east of here. Driver made it to town with 2 passengers. Said a young woman had wandered off just before the attack. That'd be you, I reckon." He looked out across the desert, calculating. "You've been walking in circles, madam. Town's only about 15 miles that way, but you've been heading deeper into nowhere." Beatrice felt a surge of humiliation mixed with relief. "I tried to follow the sun," she admitted weakly. A small smile touched the cowboy's weather-beaten face. "Sun's a tricky guide if you don't know how to read it right." He studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "Can you stand? My ranch is closer than town. We can get you fixed up there." With his strong hands supporting her elbows, Beatrice attempted to rise, but her legs buckled immediately. 3 days without proper food or water, combined with her injured feet, had left her weaker than she'd realized. Without hesitation, Thomas scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. "Sorry for the familiarity, madam," he said gruffly as he carried her toward his horse. "But we need to get you someplace safe before nightfall. Desert gets mighty cold after dark." "I'm not complaining," Beatrice murmured, too exhausted to worry about propriety. The solid strength of his arms around her felt like the first real safety she'd known since leaving Boston. Thomas settled her carefully on his horse, then mounted behind her. One arm circled her waist to keep her steady, while the other held the reins. "Lean back if you need to," he told her. "It's about an hour's ride to my place." As they set off at a gentle pace, Beatrice found herself relaxing against the broad chest behind her. The rhythmic motion of the horse, combined with the overwhelming relief of rescue, soon lulled her toward unconsciousness. "Stay with me, Miss Montgomery," Thomas's voice rumbled near her ear. "Tell me what brings a Boston lady out to Arizona territory all by herself." The question roused her slightly. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" She felt rather than saw his smile. "Your accent. Faint, but it's there. Plus those clothes were mighty fine before you took your desert stroll." "I was going to San Francisco," she said, her voice stronger after the water. "My father died last winter. Left debts. Our home was sold to pay them. I have an aunt in San Francisco who offered me a place to stay until I can find work as a teacher." Thomas made a thoughtful sound. "Long way to travel alone." "I had little choice," Beatrice replied. "And I was managing quite well until—" Her voice trailed off as the memory of the terrifying attack flooded back. "Until some low-down thieves decided to rob a stagecoach and steal a lady's shoes." Thomas finished for her, his voice hardening. "Don't you worry, Miss Montgomery. Sheriff Wilson's got a posse tracking them. Those kinds don't usually get far in these parts." The landscape rolled by, harsh yet beautiful in its own way. Massive red rock formations stood sentinel against the vast blue sky, while saguaro cacti reached toward the heavens like ancient guardians of the desert. In different circumstances, Beatrice might have found it breathtaking. "There it is," Thomas said eventually, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley ahead. "Blackwood Ranch. Nothing fancy, but we've got clean water, food, and a spare bed where you can rest up." As they approached, Beatrice could make out a modest but well-maintained ranch house, several outbuildings and corrals holding horses. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, and smoke curled from the chimney of what appeared to be a cookhouse. A weathered older man emerged from one of the buildings as they rode into the yard. "Found yourself some trouble, boss?" he called, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Beatrice. "Found someone else's trouble, Hank," Thomas replied as he carefully dismounted, then reached up to help Beatrice down. "This is Miss Montgomery. She's the missing passenger from that stagecoach robbery. Been wandering the desert for 3 days." Hank whistled low. "3 days out there with no water? You must be made of stern stuff, miss." Thomas lifted Beatrice into his arms again. "Get Doc Miller from town, would you, Hank? And ask Martha to heat some water and prepare the guest room." "Right away," Hank said, already moving toward the stables. Thomas carried Beatrice up the steps of the main house and through the door. The interior was surprisingly cool and comfortable, with simple but sturdy furniture. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked black hair hurried forward, her eyes widening at the sight of Beatrice's condition. "Martha, this is Miss Montgomery," Thomas explained. "She needs care urgently." "Of course," Martha said, her capable hands already testing Beatrice's forehead for fever. "The poor dear is nearly done in. Bring her to the guest room, Thomas. I'll fetch water and bandages." The guest room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt. Thomas laid Beatrice down gently, then stepped back. Suddenly awkward now that they were indoors. "Martha will help you get cleaned up," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. Doc Miller should be here in a couple of hours to look at those feet. In the meantime, I'll have some broth sent in. You need to take it slow with food after going without. Thank you, Beatrice said, reaching out to catch his hand before he could retreat. Mr. Blackwood. Thomas. You saved my life today. His storm-gray eyes finally met hers, and something passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Anyone would have done the same, he said quietly. Perhaps, Beatrice replied, but it was you who found me. A slight flush crept up his tanned neck, and he gently disengaged his hand. Rest now, Miss Montgomery. We can talk more when you're feeling stronger. As he left the room, Beatrice sank back against the pillows, the enormity of her ordeal finally crashing over her. She was alive. Against all odds, she had survived, thanks to a cowboy with kind eyes who happened to be carrying water. Martha returned with a basin of warm water, clean clothes, and a determined expression. Let's get you sorted out, Miss Montgomery. Those feet need tending, and I'd wager you'd feel human again with the desert washed away. Over the next hour, Martha helped Beatrice bathe and change into a simple cotton nightgown. The older woman clucked sympathetically as she bathed Beatrice's ravaged feet with a gentle touch. These need a doctor's attention, but I've put some salve on to ease the pain for now, she said, wrapping them in clean bandages. You're lucky Thomas found you when he did. Another day out there. She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. How did he find me? Beatrice asked, sipping at the rich beef broth Martha had brought. The desert is so vast. Martha smiled as she tidied away the washing things. Thomas knows this land better than most. When news reached us about the missing passenger, he took it upon himself to search. He's been out every day since. Every day? Beatrice was startled. But he didn't know me. That's Thomas for you, Martha said with obvious affection. He's got a good heart, that boy. Too good, some might say, for the life he's had. Beatrice wanted to ask more, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her. Martha noticed her drooping eyelids and took the half-empty bowl from her hands. Sleep now, she said kindly. The doctor will be here when you wake. Beatrice tried to thank her, but the words slurred as she drifted into the first safe sleep she'd had in days. She woke to the touch of unfamiliar hands examining her feet. The room was dimly lit by an oil lamp, suggesting several hours had passed. A gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose was carefully unwrapping Martha's bandages. Ah, you're awake, he said, noticing her stirring. I'm Dr. Miller. Don't worry, I'm nearly finished. Thomas stood by the door, his tall frame leaning against the jamb, his expression unreadable in the shadowed light. How bad is it? Beatrice asked, trying to sit up. Could be worse, Dr. Miller said frankly. You've got some nasty cuts and blisters, and there's a bit of infection starting, but nothing my medicines can't handle. The real miracle is that you avoided heat stroke and severe dehydration. He glanced at Thomas. Mr. Blackwood found you just in time, it seems. So, I'll be able to travel soon? Beatrice asked, thinking of her aunt waiting in San Francisco, probably already worried by her delayed arrival. The doctor shook his head firmly. Not for at least 2 weeks, young lady. Those feet need time to heal, and your body needs to recover from its ordeal. Any travel before then could lead to complications. 2 weeks. Beatrice's heart sank. She had barely enough money to complete her journey as it was, and now she would be delayed, dependent on the charity of strangers. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas spoke from the doorway. You're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered, Miss Montgomery. We've sent word to the stage company about your rescue. They can forward a message to your aunt in San Francisco. I can't impose, Beatrice began, but Thomas cut her off with a shake of his head. It's no imposition. We've got the room, and Martha's been wanting female company for ages. A slight smile softened his features. Besides, I didn't carry you all this way, just to have you hurt yourself trying to leave too soon. Dr. Miller packed his bag, leaving medicines and instructions with Martha. I'll be back in 3 days to check on her progress. Keep those feet elevated, Miss Montgomery, and take the powders I've left for pain if needed. After the doctor left, Martha brought in a tray with a more substantial meal-tender roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and stewed apples. Beatrice hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma reached her. "Thank you both," she said sincerely. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Eat your dinner and get well," Thomas said simply. "That's repayment enough." As he turned to leave, Beatrice called after him. Will you sit with me a while? I've been alone for so long and She trailed off, embarrassed by her neediness. Thomas hesitated, then nodded, pulling a chair near the bed. Martha gave him a knowing look before departing, closing the door softly behind her. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence as Beatrice ate. Thomas seemed content to simply be present, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Tell me about your ranch," Beatrice said eventually, setting aside her empty plate. Thomas's face lit up subtly. "Been in my family for 2 generations. My father built this house with his own hands back in '49, during the gold rush. He was smart enough to realize that feeding miners was more reliable than finding gold himself." Pride colored his voice. "We run about 200 head of cattle now, and I breed horses on the side. Good quarter horses, best cutting horses in the territory." "You love it here," Beatrice observed. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "It's in my blood. Can't imagine being anywhere else." He paused. "What about you? Is teaching your calling or just a means to an end?" Beatrice considered the question. "Both. Perhaps. I've always loved learning and helping others discover that same joy feels meaningful. But in truth, there are limited respectable options for a woman of my background, but limited means." "And what would you do if means weren't limited?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. "Travel," Beatrice answered without hesitation. "See the great cities of Europe, the pyramids of Egypt, the mountains of the Orient. I've read about so many places, seen them in books, but to experience them." Her voice took on a dreamy quality that made Thomas smile. "Sounds like you've got the wanderlust," he observed. "Seems odd for someone who nearly died in the wilderness." Beatrice laughed softly. "Perhaps that makes me foolish, but I believe there's a difference between being lost and exploring." She yawned suddenly, the day's events catching up with her again. Thomas stood. "I've kept you up too long. You need your rest." "Will I see you tomorrow?" Beatrice asked, then blushed at her forwardness. "Count on it," Thomas replied with a gentle smile. "Sleep well, Miss Montgomery." "Beatrice," she corrected. "Please, call me Beatrice." He nodded, a warm light in his eyes. "Good night then, Beatrice." The days that followed fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Though confined to bed for the first week, Beatrice found herself far from bored. Martha proved to be delightful company, sharing stories of her 30 years in the territory since coming west as a young bride. Thomas visited regularly, sometimes bringing books from his modest library for Beatrice to read. Other times, simply sitting and talking. She learned that he had inherited the ranch 5 years earlier when his father passed away. His mother had died when he was just 12, leaving him to be raised by his father and Martha, who had come to help after her own husband, Thomas's uncle, was killed in a mining accident. "Never married?" Beatrice asked one afternoon as Thomas sat by her bedside, whittling a small wooden horse. His hands stilled momentarily. "Came close once. Emma Lawson, the schoolteacher in town. But she got an offer from a school back east 3 years ago. Couldn't blame her for taking it. Teaching 20 children in a proper schoolhouse beats teaching 6 in a converted barn." There was an old pain in his voice, but it seemed long healed. Beatrice couldn't help wondering if there had been more to the story, if perhaps Emma had wanted something Thomas couldn't give, or if the land that he loved so fiercely had been something she couldn't share. "What about you?" Thomas asked, returning to his carving. "No suitor waiting back in Boston?" Beatrice shook her head. "There was someone once. Richard Harrington, son of my father's business partner. It was expected that we would marry. But when father died and the business collapsed, the Harringtons made it clear the arrangement was no longer advantageous." Thomas's expression darkened. "Sounds like you had a lucky escape from that family, if not from their financial troubles." "I've come to think so too," Beatrice admitted. "Richard was handsome and well-mannered, but there was always something calculated about his affections, as if he were investing rather than loving." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft scrape of Thomas's knife against wood. Outside, the ranch hands could be heard calling to each other as they returned from the day's work with the cattle. By the beginning of the second week, Dr. Miller declared that Beatrice could begin moving around the house, though she still needed to be careful with her healing feet. Martha provided a pair of soft moccasins and a sturdy walking stick, and Thomas often offered his arm for support when the terrain was uneven. It was during one such slow walk around the garden behind the house that Beatrice first truly noticed the beauty of the land that Thomas loved so much. The desert, which had seemed so hostile during her ordeal, now revealed its subtle charms: the delicate blooms of cacti, the dramatic cloud formations against the vast blue sky, the remarkable clarity of the air that made distant mountains seem close enough to touch. "It's beautiful," she murmured, pausing to rest on a rough-hewn bench beneath the shade of a mesquite tree. "I couldn't see it before, when I was lost. It was just—" She shuddered at the memory. Thomas sat beside her, his arm still supportively around her waist. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes easily," he said. "But once you learn its ways, it has treasures that no city can match." She turned to look at him, struck by the passion in his voice and the play of sunlight across his features. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, that their connection had grown beyond simple rescuer and rescued. Thomas seemed to feel it too, for his eyes darkened as they met hers, and for a heartbeat she thought he might kiss her. But then he cleared his throat and gently helped her to her feet. "Martha will be looking for us," he said, his voice slightly rough. "She's promised to teach you her secret biscuit recipe today, if I recall." Beatrice allowed him to lead her back toward the house, but the moment stayed with her, warming her thoughts as she helped Martha in the kitchen that afternoon. The older woman seemed to sense her distraction. "He's a good man," she said unexpectedly as they worked the dough. "Better than most, though he'd never say so himself." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Martha's knowing smile was kind. "I've seen how you look at each other, and I don't blame you. Thomas has a way about him that draws people in, makes them feel safe." She paused, her weathered hands stilling on the dough. "But he's also rooted here, deep as those old oaks by the creek. This land is part of him." The unspoken warning was clear. Beatrice was a traveler, bound for San Francisco and perhaps beyond. Thomas would never leave his ranch, his heritage. "I'm not. We're not." Beatrice stammered, then sighed. "It doesn't matter anyway. Once my feet are healed, I'll be continuing to San Francisco. My aunt is expecting me." Martha nodded, her eyes compassionate. "Of course. I just thought—" "Well, it doesn't matter what an old woman thought. Now, the secret to these biscuits is in how you fold the dough. See?" That evening, after supper, Thomas invited Beatrice to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. The air was cooler now, pleasant after the heat of the day, and the sky was performing a spectacular display of orange, pink, and deepening purple. "I received a telegram from the sheriff today," Thomas said as they sat side by side in matching rocking chairs. "They caught the men who robbed your stagecoach. Found them trying to sell some of the stolen goods in Tucson." "That's good news," Beatrice said, though the thought of facing the men who had terrified her so badly made her stomach clench. "Sheriff wants to know if you'd be willing to come to town next week to identify them," Thomas continued, watching her carefully. "Only if you're up to it." "Of course." Beatrice took a deep breath. "Yes, I can do that. It's the right thing." Thomas reached over and covered her hand with his. "I'll be with you the whole time. Those men can't hurt you now." The warmth of his hand was reassuring, and Beatrice found herself turning her palm up to clasp his fingers. They sat like that, hands entwined as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. "I never thanked you properly," Beatrice said softly. "Not just for finding me, but for all of this taking me in, caring for me." Thomas's voice was equally soft when he replied, "You don't need to thank me, Beatrice. Having you here has been—" He seemed to struggle for words. "It's been good. The house feels different with you in it. Brighter, somehow." Her heart quickened at his words, and she turned to face him in the gathering darkness. "Thomas, I—" The moment was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Hank, who came hurrying up to the porch. "Boss, sorry to disturb you, but that new mare is foaling and she's having trouble. Doc Carson's on his way, but I think we need you at the stable." Thomas stood immediately, his expression shifting to concern. "Of course. I'll be right there." He turned back to Beatrice. "I'm sorry, this might take a while." "Go," she urged him. "I understand." He hesitated just a moment longer, then squeezed her hand once more before following Hank toward the stables. Beatrice remained on the porch for some time, watching the stars emerge in their full desert glory, her thoughts as vast and complex as the night sky above her. The trip to town the following week marked Beatrice's first real outing since her rescue. Thomas drove the wagon himself, insisting that she sit on the padded bench seat while he handled the team of horses. Martha had packed a picnic lunch, as the journey would take most of the day. Willow Creek proved to be a small but bustling town, with a main street lined by wooden buildings including a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and the sheriff's office. People nodded respectfully to Thomas as they passed, several calling him by name. "Seems you're well known here," Beatrice observed. Thomas shrugged modestly. "Blackwoods have been around these parts a long time. My father helped found this town." The sheriff, a grizzled man with a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them at his office. "Miss Montgomery, good to see you recovered," he said, tipping his hat. "Those were some nasty characters who took your stagecoach. We've got them locked up tight, waiting for the circuit judge next month." The identification process was mercifully brief. Beatrice only had to look through a small window into the jail cells to confirm that the three rough-looking men inside were indeed her attackers. One of them noticed her watching and gave her a menacing leer that made her step back involuntarily. Thomas's hand immediately went to her shoulder, steady and protective. "That's enough," he told the sheriff. "She's identified them." Sheriff Wilson nodded. "That's all we needed, miss. Your statement and identification will help ensure they face the full consequences of their actions." As they left the sheriff's office, Thomas suggested they visit the general store before heading home. "Might as well make the trip worthwhile," he said. "Is there anything you need?" Beatrice hesitated. "Actually, yes. I should purchase some new shoes if possible. I can't keep borrowing Martha's moccasins, comfortable as they are." The store was well stocked for a frontier establishment, with everything from tools and farming implements to fabrics and household goods. The proprietor, a jovial man named Mr. Peterson, beamed when they entered. "Thomas Blackwood. Don't often see you in town midweek. And who's this lovely lady?" After introductions were made and Beatrice's situation briefly explained, Mr. Peterson became determined to help. "We don't have many ladies' shoes in stock, but my wife might have something that would suit. Beatrice, why don't you come on back and meet Mrs. Peterson?" In the living quarters behind the store, Mrs. Peterson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, fussed over Beatrice like a mother hen. "Those bandits took your shoes right off your feet? The savages! Here, try these. I ordered them from back east, but they pinch my bunions something terrible." The shoes were a simple but elegant pair of brown leather boots, practical yet feminine. They fit Beatrice perfectly, and when she insisted on paying for them, Mrs. Peterson named a price so low that Beatrice knew it was far below their value. "I couldn't possibly," she began, but Mrs. Peterson waved away her protest. "Consider it a welcome to Willow Creek," she said firmly. "Besides, Thomas Blackwood has helped us out more times than I can count. His cattle feed half this town, and he's never foreclosed on a loan even when times were hard." This was the first Beatrice had heard of Thomas lending money, and she looked at him questioningly as they left the store. "It's nothing," he said, a bit uncomfortably. "Sometimes folks need a helping hand to get through a bad season. Money's just a tool, like any other." His modesty only increased Beatrice's growing admiration. This man, who had rescued her from certain death, who ran a successful ranch, who was respected throughout the community, carried his virtues lightly, without pride or expectation of praise. They enjoyed their picnic lunch under a large cottonwood tree by the creek that gave the town its name. The spot was cool and peaceful, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves above them and the soft gurgle of water nearby. "This is lovely," Beatrice said, leaning back against the tree trunk. "In Boston, one can hardly find a quiet spot of nature without traveling miles from the city." Thomas stretched out his long legs, looking completely at ease. "One of the blessings of this country. Space to breathe." He glanced at her. "Though I imagine there are things you miss about city life." Beatrice considered this. "Libraries," she admitted. "The theater, music. But mostly it's the people I miss my father. Before he became ill. My childhood friends." She smiled wistfully. "Though I must say, the company here has proven most agreeable." Their eyes met, and again that current of awareness passed between them. Thomas reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingertips grazing her cheek in a touch so gentle it might have been imagined. "Beatrice," he said softly, "I know you're bound for San Francisco, but Thomas Blackwood, thought that was your wagon." A booming voice interrupted whatever Thomas had been about to say. A heavy-set man in a banker's suit approached them, hand extended. "Been meaning to talk to you about that north pasture of yours. Henderson's interested in buying if you're still considering selling." Thomas stood, his expression shifting to polite neutrality as he shook the man's hand. "Mr. Donovan, this is Miss Beatrice Montgomery. Beatrice, Edward Donovan owns the bank here in Willow Creek." Pleasantries were exchanged, but Beatrice could sense Thomas's frustration at the interruption. The moment, whatever it might have become, was lost. The banker eventually departed after extracting a promise from Thomas to consider his offer, though Beatrice noticed that Thomas made no commitment to sell. "North pasture?" she asked as they packed up their picnic things. Thomas sighed. "It's good grazing land, but it's separate from the main ranch about 5 miles north. Been thinking of selling it to invest in improving the irrigation system for the rest of the property." He looked troubled. "My father always said never to sell land, that they aren't making any more of it. But times change." As they drove back to the ranch, Beatrice found herself wondering what Thomas had been about to say before the banker interrupted them. The question lingered in her mind along with the memory of his gentle touch on her cheek. That evening, after supper, Thomas received a visitor, a young cowboy from a neighboring ranch, who brought news that altered their quiet routine dramatically. Indians hit the Marshall place last night, the rider reported, his face grim. Took some horses, burned a barn. Old man Marshall's hurt pretty bad. Thomas's expression hardened. Apache? The cowboy nodded. Looks like a small war party, maybe a dozen braves. Army's been notified, but Colonel Stevens is asking all able men to join a patrol. They're worried the Apache might hit other outlying ranches. Thomas turned to Martha and Beatrice, who had been listening with growing concern. I have to go, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Hank and I will ride with the patrol. Martha, make sure the men keep extra watch while we're gone. Of course, Martha said, her face tight with worry. Be careful, Thomas. Beatrice followed him to his room, where he was already packing saddlebags with ammunition and supplies. Is it very dangerous? She asked, standing uncertainly in the doorway. Thomas paused, then looked at her directly. It can be. The Apache are fierce warriors, and they've been pushed to desperation by broken treaties and encroachment on their lands. His expression softened slightly. But don't worry, I know this territory well, and I don't take unnecessary risks. When will you return? A few days? Perhaps a week? He closed his saddlebags and turned to face her fully. Beatrice, there's something I've been wanting to say to you. Her heart quickened. Yes? For a moment, he seemed to struggle with himself, then shook his head. It can wait until I return. This isn't the right time. Before she could protest, he stepped forward and took her hands in his. Promise me you'll still be here when I get back. Your feet are healing well, but just promise me. I promise, Beatrice said softly, understanding that he was asking for more than just her physical presence. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then, in a move that surprised them both, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Stay safe, he murmured before releasing her hands and striding from the room. Within 20 minutes, Thomas and Hank had ridden out to join the patrol, leaving Beatrice standing on the porch, watching until they disappeared from sight. The days that followed were some of the longest of Beatrice's life. Though Martha kept her busy with household tasks and teaching her various frontier skills, baking bread in the outdoor oven, preserving fruits, even basic leatherworking, her thoughts constantly returned to Thomas, wondering where he was, if he was safe. You've fallen for him, haven't you? Martha asked bluntly on the fourth day, as they worked together mending shirts in the parlor. Beatrice's needle stilled. There seemed little point in denying it. Yes, she admitted. Though I don't know what good it will do either of us. My aunt is expecting me in San Francisco, and Thomas belongs here. Martha set down her sewing. Child, there are stagecoaches to San Francisco every week. Your aunt might be expecting you, but is she depending on you? Do you depend on her? The question gave Beatrice pause. In truth, her aunt's invitation had been kind, but not essential. The older woman lived comfortably with her second husband and had offered Beatrice a place to stay until she could establish herself as a teacher. It was not as if her aunt's survival depended on Beatrice's arrival. I suppose not, she said slowly. But what would I do here? I came west to teach, to be independent. Willow Creek's been needing a proper teacher for years, Martha pointed out. The children are taught by the minister's wife now, but she's expecting her fifth child and has said she can't continue past Christmas. She picked up her sewing again. As for independence, I've never known Thomas to expect a woman to be anything but her own person. His mother ran this ranch alongside his father as an equal partner. The possibility that had seemed so remote staying in Willow Creek, near Thomas, suddenly appeared within reach. But Beatrice was cautious. Even if that were possible, I don't know how Thomas feels. He's been kind, certainly, but kindness isn't love. Martha's smile was knowing. I've known that boy since he was 12 years old. I've seen him with friends, neighbors, even with Emma Lawson. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Beatrice felt a flush of hope, but before she could respond, they heard the sound of hooves in the yard. Both women rushed to the window, but it wasn't Thomas returning. It was one of the ranch hands, riding hard. "Indians!" he shouted as he dismounted. "Coming this way! Get everyone inside!" Martha moved with surprising speed for her age, calling orders to the workers and ushering Beatrice back into the house. "Get my shotgun from behind the kitchen door," she directed as men began running toward the main house from the fields and barns. Within minutes, the ranch was transformed into a makeshift fortress. Windows were shuttered, doors barricaded. The remaining ranch hands, 5 men in total, positioned themselves at strategic points with rifles at the ready. "What about the others?" Beatrice asked as Martha pressed a pistol into her hands. "They were working the South Range today. Too far to call back," Martha said grimly. "We have to hope they stay away until this is over." Time stretched interminably as they waited, the tension building with each passing minute. Beatrice found herself praying for their safety, for Thomas's return, for an end to the violence that seemed to shadow this beautiful but harsh land. When the attack came, it was swift and terrifying. War cries split the air as mounted warriors charged from the cover of a dry wash, firing rifles and arrows at the house and outbuildings. The ranch hands returned fire from their defensive positions, and Martha stood grimly at a window, her shotgun ready. "Stay low," she instructed Beatrice, "and don't shoot unless you have to." The exchange of gunfire lasted perhaps 15 minutes, though to Beatrice it seemed like hours. The Apache, finding the ranch well defended, eventually withdrew, but not before setting fire to one of the distant barns. "They'll be back," predicted Hector, one of the older ranch hands, as he reloaded his rifle. "Probably after dark. They know we're outnumbered." Martha's face was set in determined lines. "Then we'd better be ready for them. Hector, get the water barrels filled in case they try to burn us out. Miguel, check our ammunition. Beatrice, help me prepare food and bandages. This might be a long night." As they worked, Beatrice was struck by Martha's calm efficiency in the face of danger. "You've done this before," she observed. "3 times," Martha confirmed. "First with my husband at the mining camp, then twice here with Thomas's father. The frontier forges you, child. You either bend and grow strong, or you break." Darkness fell, bringing with it a deepening sense of vulnerability. The men took turns watching while the others tried to rest. Beatrice found sleep impossible, her mind filled with images of Thomas returning to find the ranch destroyed, or worse. It was just past midnight when they heard it, the sound of many horses approaching fast from the east. Everyone tensed, weapons ready. "That's too many to be the Apache returning," Martha whispered, peering through a crack in the shutters. "Could be the army." A familiar voice called out from the darkness. "Martha, it's Thomas. We've got the army with us." Relief flooded through Beatrice so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. Martha threw open the door, and Thomas rushed in, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his eyes immediately seeking Beatrice. "You're safe," he breathed, crossing the room in 3 long strides to take her hands. "When we heard the Apache were heading this way." "We're all fine," Beatrice assured him, fighting the urge to throw herself into his arms. They attacked, but withdrew when they met resistance. Outside, soldiers were dismounting, establishing a perimeter around the ranch. Colonel Stevens, a stern-faced man with a thick mustache, entered the house to confer with Thomas. "We tracked them after they hit the Johnson place," he explained. "Lost their trail for a while, but then one of my scouts reported they were heading this way. Looks like we arrived just in time." "They may return," Thomas said, his hand still holding Beatrice's. "They managed to burn the north barn before withdrawing." The colonel nodded. "My men will stay until dawn. By then, the rest of the patrol should have caught up with the main war party, This was just a splinter group. The remainder of the night passed without incident. As dawn broke, Thomas took Beatrice outside to survey the damage in the early light. The burned barn was a total loss, but the rest of the ranch had escaped relatively unscathed. "It could have been much worse," Thomas said, his arm around her shoulders as they stood looking at the smoking ruins. "If Martha hadn't organized a defense so quickly—" "She's remarkable," Beatrice agreed. "She told me she's been through similar attacks before." Thomas nodded. "This land has been contested for generations. The Apache believe, with some justification, that it's rightfully theirs." He sighed heavily. "Sometimes I wonder if there will ever be true peace here." Beatrice leaned into his side, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "There must be a way for people to live together without constant conflict." "Perhaps," Thomas said, looking down at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "With enough people who believe that, maybe it's possible." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Thomas spoke again, his voice low and earnest. "Beatrice, before I left, I said there was something I wanted to tell you." Her heart quickened. "Yes, I remember." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "These past weeks, having you here, it's changed everything. I know you have plans, a life waiting for you in San Francisco, but I can't let you go without telling you how I feel." He took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you, Beatrice Montgomery. Completely, utterly in love. And if there's any chance that you might feel something similar, any chance at all that you might consider staying here, with me." Joy bubbled up within her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "I've fallen in love with you too. These weeks have been the most meaningful of my life, despite all the difficulties." Hope blazed in his eyes. "Then you might consider staying?" "Martha mentioned that Willow Creek needs a teacher," Beatrice said with a small smile. "And my aunt's invitation was kind, but not essential. She would understand." Thomas's face lit with happiness. "You would stay? Truly?" "If I'm offered the teaching position," Beatrice qualified, though her smile belied any real doubt. "I did come west to be independent, after all." "Of course," Thomas agreed quickly. "I would never want to clip your wings, Beatrice. Your spirit, your determination, they're part of why I love you." He hesitated, then added softly, "But perhaps, in time, you might consider making your home here, with me, not as a dependent, but as a partner." The implication was clear, and Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "I think I would like that very much, Thomas. In time." He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then I am the most fortunate man in Arizona territory." The moment was interrupted by the approach of Colonel Stevens, come to inform them that his men would be departing soon. The immediate danger had passed, though the colonel advised vigilance in the coming weeks. As the soldiers rode out, Thomas and Beatrice returned to the house, where Martha was already organizing the cleanup efforts. The older woman took one look at their joined hands and beamed. "Well, it's about time," she declared. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to get you to speak your minds." Thomas laughed, the sound carefree despite the trials of the past days. "No need for such drastic measures, Martha. Beatrice has agreed to stay in Willow Creek to apply for the teaching position." "And about time we had a proper teacher," Martha approved, "though I suspect there's more to this decision than just professional ambition." Her knowing gaze made both of them blush. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Beatrice wrote to her aunt, explaining her decision to remain in Arizona territory. The reply, when it came, was supportive, and even a bit envious of Beatrice's adventure. "It seems you've found your place in the world, dear niece," her aunt wrote. "That is no small thing, and certainly worth changing one's plans for. I look forward to meeting this remarkable Mr. Blackwood someday. The school board in Willow Creek, consisting of the minister, the banker, and the town doctor, interviewed Beatrice and promptly offered her the position of town teacher to begin after the harvest festival in October. The salary was modest but sufficient, especially when combined with room and board at the small teacherage beside the schoolhouse. Though Thomas had made his feelings clear, he courted Beatrice properly over the summer months. They rode together across the ranch lands, picnicked by hidden springs, and spent evenings on the porch talking about everything from literature to cattle breeding. Each day deepened their understanding of each other, revealing new facets to admire and occasionally new differences to navigate. "I can't believe you've never read Wuthering Heights," Beatrice exclaimed one evening as they discussed books. "It's a magnificent exploration of passion and revenge." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Sounds cheerful. I tend to prefer Mr. Twain's work myself. Practical wisdom with a dash of humor." Their literary disagreement led to Beatrice reading aloud from her favorite novels in the evenings, while Thomas introduced her to the practical poetry of managing the land, knowing when to plant, how to read the weather, which grasses indicated good soil. By late August, with the desert blooming after unexpected rains, Thomas asked Beatrice to accompany him to a special place on the ranch, a hidden canyon, where a year-round spring created a lush oasis of cottonwoods and willows. They rode out early, before the heat of the day, and arrived just as the morning sun was illuminating the red rock walls of the canyon. "It's breathtaking," Beatrice said, as they dismounted near the spring. Birds called from the trees, and the gurgle of water over rocks provided a soothing backdrop. "My father proposed to my mother here," Thomas said, taking her hand and leading her to a flat rock beside the pool. "And his father proposed to his mother in this same spot. It's something of a Blackwood tradition." Beatrice's heart began to race as Thomas turned to face her, still holding her hand. "Beatrice Montgomery," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy, intelligence, and beauty into my world in ways I never imagined possible." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I know you value your independence, and I would never ask you to give that up. But I'm hoping you might consider building a life with me, teaching the children of Willow Creek. Yes, but also being my wife, my partner in all things." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a delicate band of gold set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Martha has been keeping it safe all these years." Tears of happiness welled in Beatrice's eyes. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered. "Yes, yes, I would be honored to be your wife." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been made for her. Thomas drew her to her feet and into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate, a meeting of equals. When they finally broke apart, Beatrice laughed with pure joy. "To think that 3 months ago I was lost in the desert, certain I would die. And now you've found your home," Thomas finished for her, his eyes shining with love. "Yes," Beatrice agreed, looking around at the beautiful canyon, then back to the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "I've found where I belong." They were married in October, just after the harvest festival. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers and farmers from miles around. Beatrice wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha and Mrs. Peterson had worked on secretly for weeks, and Thomas looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new black suit. The schoolhouse, decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons, had never looked so festive. As Beatrice walked down the aisle on the arm of Sheriff Wilson, who had graciously agreed to give her away, she caught sight of Thomas waiting for her, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration that nearly took her breath away. The minister's words were traditional but heartfelt, and when it came time for their vows, both Beatrice and Thomas spoke with clear, unwavering voices. The promises they made to love, honor, and cherish each other through all of life's joys and sorrows were not entered into lightly, but with the full understanding of two people who had already faced danger together and emerged stronger. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household. There was dancing to fiddle music, speeches from well-wishers, and enough cake to feed twice the number of guests. As evening approached, Thomas led Beatrice away from the festivities toward where their horses waited, saddled and ready. "Where are we going?" Beatrice asked, though she had a suspicion. Thomas smiled, helping her mount. "I thought we might spend our wedding night somewhere special." They rode in companionable silence through the gathering dusk, the familiar trail leading to the hidden canyon. Thomas had been busy there, Beatrice discovered upon their arrival. A small cabin, rustic but sturdy, now stood near the spring. "When did you build this?" she asked in amazement as Thomas lifted her down from her horse. "Hank and I started it the week after you accepted my proposal," he admitted. "I wanted us to have a special place, just for us." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it?" In answer, Beatrice threw her arms around his neck and kissed him soundly. "It's perfect," she declared when they finally separated. "Absolutely perfect." Thomas carried her across the threshold in the traditional manner, revealing an interior that was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a small table and chairs, and a bed covered in Martha's finest quilt. As the night deepened around them, they discovered each other fully for the first time, their love expressed in whispered words and tender touches. Later, lying in each other's arms with the desert stars visible through the small window, Beatrice marveled at the journey that had brought her here. "If I hadn't been lost in the desert," she murmured against Thomas's chest, "if you hadn't found me, I would have found you somehow," Thomas replied, stroking her hair. "Maybe not in the desert, but somewhere. Some paths are meant to cross, Beatrice." She smiled in the darkness, believing him. After all, hadn't she been searching for her place in the world? And against all odds, she had found it not in the great cities she had dreamed of visiting, but in the Arizona territory, with a cowboy who had carried water and hope when she needed them most. As she drifted towards sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, Beatrice thought that perhaps getting lost had been the best thing that ever happened to her. For in losing her way, she had found her heart's true home. 5 years later, Beatrice stood on the porch of the main ranch house, watching as Thomas taught their 3-year-old son James to sit on his first pony. The little boy's delighted giggles carried across the yard, a sound that never failed to warm her heart. Beside her, Martha rocked gently in her chair, knitting what would be a blanket for the new baby Beatrice carried a sister for James, they hoped. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" Martha asked, her knitting needles clicking steadily. "When you were lost in that desert all those years ago?" Beatrice smiled, one hand resting on her growing belly. "Never. I thought my adventure was just beginning when I left Boston. I had no idea where it would lead." In the 5 years since their marriage, the Blackwood Ranch had prospered. Thomas's innovative irrigation system had increased their productivity significantly, and Beatrice's school was now recognized as one of the best in the territory. They had even begun taking in orphaned children from the nearby Apache reservation, teaching them alongside the town children in hopes of building bridges between the communities. Life wasn't always easy. The land still presented challenges, and tensions between settlers and native peoples remained, but it was rich and meaningful in ways Beatrice could never have anticipated. Thomas looked up, catching her watching him. Even now, after years together, his smile still made her heart skip a beat. He lifted James onto his shoulders and strode toward the house. "Mama!" the little boy called excitedly. I rode a horse. I saw, sweetheart, Beatrice replied, reaching up to take him as Thomas transferred him from his shoulders to her arms. You're going to be a fine horseman like your father. Thomas leaned in to kiss her softly. Teacher meeting run late? He asked, knowing she had been in town that morning. A bit. We were discussing expanding the school next year. She shifted James to her hip. The town council has approved the funding. Pride shone in Thomas's eyes. That's wonderful news. You've done amazing things with that school, Beatrice. Later that evening, after James was asleep and Martha had retired to her room, Thomas and Beatrice sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. The desert night was cool and clear, with the scent of sage carried on the gentle breeze. I've been thinking, Thomas said, his arm around her shoulders. Maybe next spring, when the baby is old enough to travel, we might take a trip to San Francisco. Visit your aunt. See some of those city sights you used to talk about. Beatrice looked at him in surprise. Really? You'd want to do that? He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she loved. I may be a desert man at heart, but even I get curious about the wider world sometimes. Besides, he added, his hand finding hers, I think it's important for our children to know there's more to life than just what they see here. You taught me that. Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a contentment so deep it seemed to radiate from her very bones. I'd like that, she said. But you know, I don't feel that restless wanderlust anymore. This land, this life we've built, it's more than enough. Thomas's arm tightened around her. No regrets, then? About the girl who dreamed of pyramids and distant mountains? Not one, Beatrice answered truthfully. She found something better than all those wonders she found where she truly belonged. As they sat together in the quiet night, the ranch sleeping peacefully around them, Beatrice reflected on the strange and beautiful journey that had brought her here. Lost in the desert without shoes, she had been found by a cowboy carrying water, and in that moment of rescue, though neither of them could have known it then, both their lives had changed forever. The desert, which had once nearly claimed her life, was now her home. Its harsh beauty a daily reminder of both life's fragility and its endless capacity for renewal. And Thomas, who had once been a stranger extending a helping hand, was now the center of her world, the compass by which she navigated life's joys and challenges. Some might call it destiny, others mere chance. But Beatrice preferred to think of it as finding the path she was always meant to walk barefoot at first, perhaps, but never truly lost again.